Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 324 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing Disenchantment, a new fantasy cartoon from Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons and Futurama. And this will involve spoilers for the first 10 episodes, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So, first up, we've got Robert Repino, who you may remember from our panel on the Orville back in episode 288. He's the author of the novels Mort, Dark, and Cul-de-sac, and his short fiction appears in literary journals such as Night Train, Word Riot, and the Furnace Review. He teaches at the Gotham Writers Workshop, and is also a frequent contributor to Tor.com, with articles like What Mr. Rogers Can Teach Us About Storytelling. By day, he works as an editor for the Oxford University Press. So, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Then next up, we've got Andrea Kail, who you may remember from our panel on Game of Thrones spoilers back in episode 146. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in Writers of the Future Volume 23, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's also a television writer and producer, and was the script supervisor for Late Night with Conan O'Brien. So, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
And also joining us today is Tom Gerencer, who you may remember from our panel on Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency back in episode 281. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Galaxy's Edge and Realms of Fantasy, and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction and I, Alien. He's a former whitewater professional who ran his own video production business for 8 years, and he currently writes articles on money, nutrition, resumes, medical waste, and lifestyle. So, Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's start off with Robert. And Robert, I just want to ask everyone what they thought of Matt Groening's previous shows, The Simpsons and Futurama. So, are you a big fan of those shows? Have you watched them a lot?
I think, like a lot of people, I'm a big fan of The Simpsons up until season, 12 or something, and haven't watched very many new episodes in a long time. But I have quite a few of the first few seasons practically memorized, and I quote them incessantly, and I think they've had a huge influence on me. Futurama, I don't know as well. I think I watched it mostly when it first came out, and I feel like there was another iteration of Futurama that came out later after it left Fox. I think I'm correct in saying.
Yeah,
that,
I
right?
think it was on Comedy Central after that.
Yeah,
right. So I think I watched the first iteration of it and enjoyed it, but I was older and therefore, I don't know, maybe more jaded. I don't know. Maybe I didn't enjoy it as much as The Simpsons, but it's a really cool show, and I'm glad that they resurrected it. And the few newer episodes I saw, I was very impressed with. So I had a great impression of all that, and was looking forward to Disenchantment. So
yeah, so I stopped watching The Simpsons. I was also a big fan of The Simpsons, and I stopped watching it in college. So that would have been around the year 2000. Is that about the same time you stopped watching it?
About the same time, yeah.
Yeah. How about Andrea? Simpsons, Futurama?
Yeah, pretty much Robert said everything I could possibly say about it. I couldn't tell you when I stopped watching The Simpsons, but I haven't watched in a long time. But there are lines from that show that I will say over and over and over again. And even if nobody else knows what I'm talking about, they still make me laugh, and I don't care. And Futurama, I remember watching it when it first came out, and it was funny, and it's a lot sharper than The Simpsons. But it petered out for me, and so I didn't follow it to Comedy Central. But I still have great memories of it. It's a really sharp show.
Yeah, I've watched every episode of Futurama, and I actually think some of the episodes toward the end are some of the best. I mean, there's the finale, I think, is really good, which I think is the one with the 10-second rewinding time machine, and that's just brilliant. And there's the time machine that only goes forward. There's the mind swapping where you can't swap back into the same. You can't swap the same two people back. There's just some really good episodes that from what I remember, are almost toward the end of the run. Right. So how about Tom? Simpsons, Futurama?
Yeah, same exact experience. I don't know, maybe if you sampled like 1,000 people, they'd all say the same thing. But I had the same experience. I loved The Simpsons in college. I loved it even a bit after college. And then I just kind of stopped watching it at some point, and then Futurama came on, and I was like, cool, science fiction comedy, I love it. And I watched like 3 or 4 episodes, and I was like, it's not really my thing. And then unfortunately, I haven't seen the episodes you're talking about toward the end of the run, so I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I think that Futurama got off to a bit of a rocky start. I can remember not thinking it was that great, but I still watched it just because, like you said, it was science fiction humor, and there's just not a lot of that out there. I'll mention just in passing, Tom and I are both big Douglas Adams fans, so we're always kind of, I think, on the lookout for more stuff like that. But yeah, and I think Futurama is always hit or miss with the individual episodes, but I love just the idea of a science fiction comedy cartoon, is enough to make me stick with it. And there are enough brilliant episodes sort of sprinkled in there, that I did watch every episode, like I said. And I'll say that, I mean, the reason I stopped watching The Simpsons is because I felt like that when it started out, or in the early years anyway, that it was funny and there was social commentary and slapstick humor, but there was also a lot of heart and a lot of just strong stories. And I felt like when I stopped watching it, I felt like it had lost a lot of the heart and the storylines, and it was the episodes just seemed to be a collection of gags strung together, and it seems like nobody was taking it that seriously. And it was like a band that just gets up on stage and they all play their like listlessly play their familiar hits. Yeah.
Well, at the base of it, it's a family show. It's a show about families. It's making fun of the classic family sitcom, but it's also, that's what it is as well. So that's where the heart comes from. I think about all of The Simpsons.
Could I ask a quick question, everybody? Did anybody like the Simpsons movie? I remember liking it and thinking that this could have been the better model for the show going forward, rather than having another 20-episode season, once in a while having a movie that sort of brings together the best of what would otherwise be a stretched out 20-episode season. But anybody have any strong feelings about the movie?
I did like the movie. I didn't think it was great, but I liked it. But I think your idea that you concentrate your best writing every once in a while into this great movie is a good one,
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a fantastic idea. I don't even know that I ever saw the movie, but I think it would be that's a really cool way to do it. Just say, hey, look, let's not just beat a dead horse just because we have to fill the form, but every once in a while, if we've got a lot of great ideas, let's just bring them out because people want to see them.
There are actually a lot of genre shows that did that, like Incredible Hulk, Alien Nation. I think even Walker, Texas Ranger went to that format at one point. The best of a Walker season. You want that in a movie.
How much about Walker, Texas Ranger do you know? I'm interested now.
I could sing the theme song for you.
I'm so sad for you.
No, let me explain. It's not. I never really watched the show, but I know some people who ironically love it, including a band that I hung out with once. So the band actually did a cover of it. So it's not me. I swear I did not like the show.
All right, well, we'll save it for our Walker, Texas Ranger panel.
Yeah, sorry, I derailed everything already.
Please, I definitely want to talk about Walker, Texas Ranger.
But I'll say I never saw the Simpsons movie, so I can't comment on that specifically. But I think a problem is just when the show runs for 30 years, whatever The Simpsons has run for.
Yeah.
I mean, good storytelling is about character development, and there's only so many stories you can tell about, like, an 8-year-old or whatever, learning life lessons. After a while, it can't help but become sort of a joke because the characters have had so many experiences that should have changed them, and if they don't change and don't grow and never get older, the sense of reality of the whole thing is just very hard to maintain.
Yeah, well, it is, and in fact, 30 years.
The showrunners for the show Cheers. I'm dating myself here, but that was when I was younger. Everybody loved that show. That was a hugely popular show, and I remember reading something from one of the showrunners at one point. It's like Les Burrows Charles or something like that. That they said there's 3 rules on this show: nobody hugs. Nobody learns anything, and I don't remember the third one, but it was something like nobody grows or something like that. So, which is a funny idea for a show, but that's the way they ran it. It actually worked somehow.
Well, it's because it's a show about essentially kind of jerky people. They're kind of all jerks.
Yeah, I mean, you could say the same thing about Seinfeld, I guess, but...
Yes, exactly. They don't change. Yeah. That was the point.
Yeah, but Seinfeld never had heart, in the same way that the early Simpsons did, and so I guess you don't feel the loss of it when it goes away, if it was never there to start with.
It was never there to start with.
All right, but yeah, so now that we've established everyone's history with these Matt Groening shows, let's get into Disenchantment a little bit. So, how about Robert? What were your kind of your expectations going into the show, and kind of what was your reaction to the first episode or two?
Well, it wasn't until very late, right before I started watching it, that I knew that this was going to be a serial show, that it was going to be a long arc narrative over the course of many episodes, and that raised my expectations for the character development. Like, I thought that this was good. The opposite of what Tom was just talking about, with how nobody changes and everything gets reset at the end of each episode and get tied in a little bow, and we start over the next one. So those expectations were high. I was also just, and maybe this isn't fair, but some of the animated shows that are out there that are really smart and edgy, whether you like them or not, I mean, I think they're really, I don't know, they're a little more, I don't know, they're just a little more edgy, like shows like Rick and Morty, or even like a show like Teen Titans Go. I was thinking, like, how is this show going to compete with those in terms of just the creativity and the storytelling and the wackiness? How is it going to compete with those when it's still using a style of humor that at this point is now, we have 30 seasons worth of it. So I had some high expectations for the character development, some low expectations for the humor. And to answer your question about the first episode, I wasn't crazy about the pilot. And sorry to jump ahead, but I almost felt that the last episode of this 10-episode arc would have made a better pilot. It's because it raises the stakes in a way and really sets us on an adventure, whereas this episode felt like it was just putting the characters into this position, but I was still very murky about the motivations, still very, very murky about what people wanted and things like that. Maybe I'm taking a cartoon too seriously. I get that, and at any point, please feel free to remind me of that. But I felt like this was less of a story and more of a putting the pieces in place, and knowing that you're going to keep watching, because this is the nature of binge TV shows.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I'll say I was underwhelmed by the show, certainly initially. And I think part of that is that, I thought I thought a lot of the jokes were falling flat. And it also, it feels a lot like Matt Groening's other shows where, so the setup, basically, it's a medieval fantasy world, and the main character is this rebellious teenage princess named Bean. And she quickly acquires two sidekicks, a demon named Lucy, who is always encouraging her to do bad things, and a elf named Elfo, who comes from a sort of Keebler elf kind of happy land and wants to experience misery in real life. Incidentally, I kind of like that setup, but I thought these characters were very similar to Leela, Fry, and Bender from Futurama in a way that feels very repetitive off the bat. I guess, Andrea, do you want to pick up on that?
I agree with everything you said. I went into it not knowing anything more about it than it's Matt Groening and it's a medieval fantasy comedy. So I was expecting Simpsons, Futurama, episodic kind of humor. And that's not what I got. I got a series that has an overarching story, but I didn't realize that till I was halfway through, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it." But the first episode was just, I literally wrote in my notes as I was watching it, I haven't laughed once. Everything was old, rehashed. As you said, the characters are Leela, Fry, and Bender. Exactly that. Everything felt just retread. There was nothing new going on. It was too much setup, and it was no real jokes going on. I maybe smiled one time in the first episode, maybe smiled twice in the second episode. So if I didn't have to watch all of them because I was doing this, I wouldn't have gotten past episode 1. You did.
David
you essentially
made us.
forced me. Yes. I was forced to do this, but I'm glad I got to the end because I know, and I said, same with you, Robert, I'm skipping ahead because the ending was good as opposed to the beginning, which was, I genuinely would not have gotten past episode 1 if I left to my own devices.
Yeah, and I don't want to say too much about the ending because let's get to that later. But I will note that this show has gotten pretty mixed to poor reviews, and they sent out the first 7 episodes to reviewers, which I think is just baffling. I mean, maybe that's all they had ready to go or something. But the first 7 episodes are like 5 times worse than the last 2 or 3, and I think that's pretty unfortunate for the. For giving people a sense of how good the show could get. But, so Tom, getting back to these first couple episodes, though, do you agree with our initial impressions of the show, or did you have a different take on it?
Yes. Yeah, no, sorry. I'm just kidding. I agree. I totally agree. I probably wouldn't. It's one of those shows that if I'd started watching it on my own, I probably would have watched the first episode and maybe half of the second episode and been like, nah. To quote Elfo, Elfo's appraisal of War, I like it, but I don't love it. So there were things to like about it. I did laugh like 10 times in the first episode, but there were so many jokes that were just like, yeah, it's not really funny. But there was like, they're like, oh, we're going to be here for a long time. We're going to need chairs. These evil people are saying this. And then one of them says, yes, dark chairs. I laughed at that one. And then,
I agree with you. That was one of my smiles in episode 1.
Okay. And then they were going to hang Elfo from the gumdrop tree at one point. I think I laughed at that one. And
yeah.
There was a few laughs in there, but they were just few and far between. And I remember thinking The Simpsons seems like I was laughing belly laughs all the way through it the first few times I watched it. But I kind of was wondering if Matt Groening went to Netflix when he first thought of the idea and was like, I have a really cool idea. This is after I watched the whole 10 episodes. I was picturing he went to Netflix and was like, I have a really cool idea for a Netflix movie that's like a fantasy. And that they came back and said, geez, can you stretch it into into 2 seasons of a serial show? And he went, yeah, okay, I can do that. And then, because like you said, the actual plot arc, especially if you follow it through the last couple of episodes, is really cool. But everything in the beginning just kind of feels like filler to get to that point.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, wait, so Andrew, you said you didn't laugh at all in the first episode, but what about the part where Elfo has his slutty elf girlfriend, and she says, "I've never said this before, but I can't go all the way."
No, it's funnier when you said it.
Yeah, you should have done the voice of that character, David.
Yeah. No, I can tell you exactly what I smiled at the dark chairs. I smiled at the little bird that goes to see the elf prostitute.
Yeah.
I smiled at that.
No, she's
that was it.
Fairy prostitute.
The fairy prostitute. The fairy prostitute. And that was it. Those are the 2 moments in that first episode where and all I did was smile. I'm not saying I laughed. I said I smiled, and that was it.
I made a note of the one joke that I laughed at, which was when the jester goes, "And now you've got Bub Kiss," and they throw him out the window.
Yeah.
That was all I had.
The whole episode is much funnier when you guys are repeating saying it.
Well, then there was 2 others that you didn't smile at this, Andrea, when Elfo says, "He's making fun of my dreams. That's what friends do."
No. I'm laughing now, but I genuinely did not laugh.
What about when Bean says, she gets choked up and she goes, "What's this feeling that I don't want to drink away?"
No, I don't remember that one. That was episode 1?
That was the first episode, yeah.
Wait. So Andrea, do your notes just say I haven't laughed once, or did you have any other notes? That was.
Let me see what I wrote. No outright laughs, no jokes. Trying to hit all. I'm just gonna read my bullet points. Trying to hit all the tropes. Only laugh so far. Evil people around cauldron. That was the dark chairs.
Okay.
Button on prostitute fairy was funny. I smiled. There you go.
Well, so like I said,
That's it.
I thought the setup of Elfo as this iconoclast who wants to experience like savory food. He's only ever eaten candy and he's only ever been around happy singing elves, and he wants to experience something different. I thought that was really interesting and kind of
Yes,
fresh.
I agree.
But then the problem is that starting in episode 2, it seems like he just becomes infatuated with Bean, and all the jokes just become about him like failing to hit it off with Bean, and the whole like more would I even call it philosophical or but that whole aspect of him as not fitting into his society and wanting to experience life differently felt like it just dropped completely.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Andrea. I'm sorry.
And I was just going to say that it's like he becomes a completely different character. And now I've forgotten what I was going to say. So go ahead, Robert. Maybe I'll remember.
I'm so sorry. Well, real quick, I thought that, and again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but we find out later that Elfo might have a past or might have a provenance that is supposed to be a surprise. I thought that something about that could have been a better motivation for him to leave. Because the thing is, he's not just happy all the time in this happy land. He also has a girlfriend, and there's some adventure to it. So his just outright statement that I don't want to be that happy anymore felt like they were telling you rather than showing you. I know that's such a cheap accusation to make, but that's really what it felt like. The other thing about how his character changed was that, they made him so innocent in episode 1 that he doesn't even seem to know what war is. But then, like, later, there are other scenes where he actually, like, you actually see him fighting with people. There was actually a scene where he's repeatedly fighting people who are twice as big as he is. And I was like, I think that's what it would look like if I fought David Barr Kirtley. I would be the Elfo in that equation, by the way, just for those at home.
I would pay money to see that, actually.
Yeah, well.
Maybe that's a future Netflix special.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
Or, that could be like pay-per-view for our higher ranking Patreon subscribe.
We're on to something here.
But let me say, because I mentioned that the characters are basically just Leela, Fry, and Bender, but I feel like the dynamics of these characters are a little bit broken, because I think what makes Leela, Fry, and Bender work is that, like, Fry and Bender basically don't give a crap about anything. Bender much more aggressively so, but Leela cares a lot and wants to get the mission done, and has feelings of responsibility and so on. So there's this conflict between, like, particularly her and Bender, where she wants to do things right and he wants to just, like, screw around. And with these three characters, with Bean and Elfo and Lucy, like, Bean doesn't care about anything, and Lucy certainly doesn't care about anything, and Elfo will just go along basically with whatever Bean says. So there's really no conflict between the three characters, right. and they all just sort of, like, don't care about anything, and that's not, like, I feel like there has to be at least one character who's responsible or idealistic or, driven, right. or something.
Right. And also Leela was competent, very smart and very competent, and Bean really isn't competent in any way. Yeah. She's just drunk all the time and angry and upset. She's a teenager who's drunk. So it's like this pale copy of those characters from Futurama. It's the same dynamic, but not living up to the fullness that those characters were.
Yeah, like you said, there's no conflict between them. Like, if you go back to The Simpsons, those are that whole family. Each character is pulling in a completely different direction from all the others, so it makes some great conflict, and it resonates with us because that's kind of what families are like. Mm-hmm. But I remember too, you guys were saying a little bit earlier how The Simpsons, how this just kind of, the characters were kind of one dimensional, and Elfo, I think you said, Dave, Elfo is just kind of playing the same note over and over again, that he really wants to be with Bean, but she doesn't want him. Whereas, like, in The Simpsons, I remember when that first came out, it was like the first several episodes were about, excuse me just a second. No, you have to go. I'm sorry. I'm on the phone right now. Guys on the phone. Good night. Whew. Pardon me.
That was awesome.
Families. So the first several episodes of The Simpsons were all about Bart, and it was really funny. But then you started wondering, like, well, how long can this keep going on and being funny about Bart? And then all of a sudden there was like an episode that was all about Homer, and I remember that like blew everybody away at first. They're like, oh, I thought this was a show about this one kid, but now all of a sudden you got this whole episode about his dad, and then they did like several episodes about his dad, from what I remember. I mean, I haven't watched it in I don't know since I was young, but then they were like, oh, now we're gonna have one about episodes about Lisa and about Apu, and they just started pulling in all these different characters that it was mind-blowing. It was like, oh my God. Then you started seeing like, this show could go on forever because they just have this gold mine of all these really cool characters, and they're going to show you this, like, that each one is really solid and has this, like, backstory that you really can care about, and it just made it so much fun because it wasn't like another sitcom where they have, like, 4 actors, and, that means there's 4 characters, and they explore those 4 characters, or 7 characters, and then they're pretty much done, and they're just, like, getting tired, and everything's winding down. I think that's why The Simpsons is 30 years and still going relatively strong, because they can just keep introducing new characters and keep exploring new characters that you never met before. Whereas this show, it feels kind of like they've got these characters and they're not even exploring the ones they started out with.
Right. So I don't want this to turn into just like how much better The Simpsons is than this show. But I kind of have to talk about how, and what you were saying, Tom, reminded me of one of the first episodes of The Simpsons that I watched was the one where Bart's class takes a field trip to the nuclear power plant. And I mean, I saw it however many years ago, like decades ago, and I could still tell you like everything that happens in that episode because it was so funny. But so, for example, the kids are getting this tour, and someone at the nuclear power plant is saying how safe nuclear power is. And as the person is saying this, you see the outside, and you see this fish with 3 eyes kind of swim by the camera. And
Blinky.
Then, what is it?
Blinky. That's
Blinky.
The name of the fish. Is
Yeah,
Blinky.
Yeah. And then they show the class this film, sort of like this educational film about nuclear power with these cartoon like atoms and stuff. And the character says like, nuclear power is great, but it also creates like radioactive waste. And there's like these like anthropomorphic radioactive waste monsters. And he's like, so let's just sweep them under the carpet where no one will find them for millions of years. And the show, it had this, in addition to what I was saying about the heart, it had a, like social comment, like socio-political commentary. It had an attitude about nuclear power plants, and that was so striking. And it was just, I don't know if people, it's hard to even remember this now, but when The Simpsons first came out, it was like, you would think it was like the end of Western civilization from the way that the media talked about the show. It was very transgressive and very dangerous, and you would just see like stuff would be on the show where you're like, can they do that? Can they get away with that? I mean, the thing that sticks out in my mind is there's this episode where Homer decides he doesn't want to go to church anymore because it's so boring, and he goes into the Quickie Mart and he says, Apu, how come you're not in church? And Apu says, oh, but Mr. Simpson, I am. I'm here. There's my shrine to the elephant-headed god Ganesha. And Homer says, no offense, Apu, but when they were handing out religions, you must have been out taking a whiz. And yeah, and just as a kid, and even think about it now, even more so, like, how did they get away with stuff like that? It was just so like out there at the time.
Well, they are always having their problem with Apu now.
Yeah.
Which they're dealing with, I think. Last I heard.
Yeah. So if people don't know, there was a documentary called, I think, The Problem with Apu.
The Problem with Apu, yes.
Which is, sort of about some of the problematic aspects of the character. I haven't seen the documentary, so I can't comment on that very specifically. I'm sure there's a lot of legitimate points that it makes, but I do wonder how much of what seems to me the incredible safeness, like playing it safe, of Disenchantment is a result of that, of now that there's like the internet and people can just, people can criticize. Because I actually saw Matt Groening say, in the early days when they were making The Simpsons and there was no internet, they were just making these episodes and putting them out there, and they got no feedback. They had no idea how people felt about any of them. And I think that the lack of riskiness is maybe a sign of the times or something. And I would rather that shows were taking risks and crossing the line sometimes than not taking any risks at all, which does seem to me kind of what Disenchantment is, where it's at right now.
And also Netflix is a place you can take risks.
It's kind of hard to take risks nowadays, though, when you have, like, what's his name? James Gunn? Is that his name? Galaxy guy. He makes some, admittedly, pretty horrible jokes like 10 years ago, and now his career is, like, basically over, it's horrifying that can happen to somebody. So I kind of don't blame him. Like, is Netflix really a safe space? Or you meant safe space in terms of you're not allowed to offend anybody there?
Well, there's no sponsors.
Yeah, there's no sponsors, so you're not going to get cut off. you're not going to get boycotted.
On the other hand, you could say something that could cause everybody else in the industry to say you're done. We're never going to hire you again.
But I think there's backlash to the backlash with James Gunn, though. From what I'm hearing, because a lot of the actors are getting together and saying we want him back. We want to use his script. We want him back.
Yeah,
so
they're saying that, but Disney
down.
is apparently not budging, and the actors aren't saying, well, then we're all walking. I mean, that they're kind of going, okay, well, we'll still take the money, but we're not going to like it.
Well, I think they're also under contract, so there might not be a lot they can do.
Oh, okay. But I think the other problem with this show, you're talking about that great nuclear power episode, which that is like burned into my mind. Bad pun, but I totally remember that episode, and I think it's just harder to resonate maybe with fantasy. Like, they maybe should have spent more time, like, in a real world show like The Simpsons, kind of set in our real world, sort of. You can look at all the things that we have to deal with and all of our fears, nuclear power and all this stuff. Like, is that really safe? We have it. We don't know if we like it. It kind of makes us nervous. We try not to talk about it. You can play with all that stuff, but it's hard to play with all that stuff in this thing set in, like, a magical land with magical creatures. And I think maybe if they had spent more time thinking about, like, how do all those myths and legends relate to the stuff that we're afraid of, really, and the stuff that we really think about, maybe it would have been able to resonate more. I don't know.
But wait, are you saying, Tom, you think it's hard? Because I feel like maybe it's a little harder to do in fantasy, but I feel like in so many ways, fantasy and science fiction is such a perfect way to address social issues and controversial topics and things like that. I mean, that's like what the Twilight Zone did. That's what the original Star Trek did. I mean, I feel like
the Twilight Zone didn't do it in like a knights and armor and dragons sense, though.
Yeah.
It did it in our world, but with everything twisted. So they're doing it in a completely different world with all these unfamiliar characters. And I think you're right. I think it can really resonate, but I think you really have to think about, like, like Godzilla is, Stephen King has this essay where he talks about how Godzilla is really just our fear of nuclear power, like, or of nuclear bombs, nuclear war. Because Godzilla was, he was created in this test in the Pacific in an atoll with a nuclear weapon, and he comes out of the ocean and destroys Tokyo. And so Stephen King is like, that's not, that resonates with us. Number one, because we're scared of giant lizards, but also because we're terrified of nuclear bomb, nuclear war. And I think you're right, it can really resonate, but I think it's easier to resonate when you have a show like The Simpsons, where you're like, we can do anything and we can play with all these things that we're already scared of. I think maybe you have to do a little bit more thinking to make that happen in a
Tom,
fantasy
I was thinking about this earlier today and thinking, I wish that this show engaged more with contemporary politics or social events, all the kind of current events kind of stuff. And so I was trying to think, well, what do I think that they should do that would use the fantasy framework to talk about things that are in the headlines right now? And so here's my pitch for a Disenchantment episode. Elfo gets invited to speak at a Hogwarts-style wizard school, but gets deplatformed for not being cheerful and harmless enough.
Yeah.
I think that would be pretty funny. And would have a perspective, and would would even if you hated it, at least it would have a viewpoint, and it wouldn't just be like, oh, here's a fantasy world and people are acting silly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of the commentary in the show, Is anyone did you pick up King Zog being a little Trumpish? Was anyone fixated on that? I was noting the Trump moments from King Zog in this.
I thought Una seemed very Melania.
Oh yeah.
Me.
Well, there's that. There's him saying something like, oh God, wait, I have it in my notes. Something about like lying to me in any other way but flattery is a crime. He says that at one point.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And I imagine his kid might be a stand-in for any of the worthless, talentless Trump offspring.
And also, he puts the kid down constantly. So that is very Trumpian as well.
Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, because I wonder how long this has been in development. I think it takes a long time to get animation.
It does
done.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much it could be. I mean, you know, like how much it could be just about President Trump, given how much time it would have taken to get this whole thing moving. I mean,
he's been doing this. Trump, I mean, has been on the news since 2016, 2015. When did he say he was going to run? So, you know.
But if you didn't expect that he was going to win, would you have wanted to make the show The King about him if you were anticipating that he wouldn't be president? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I don't know.
He's a ridiculous enough character in real life that you couldn't not, it could be a thing. It could have been crossed his mind that, what if he actually does win? Well, here's what happens. And boy.
Maybe Tom, were you going to say something? Oh, sorry. Tom, were you going to say something?
No. I think you're probably right that, I think, this show started getting put together in 2014. I just read a couple of articles about it today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think I agree, Dave. I think maybe maybe they were still developing the show when Trump was running, but I think most people thought, well, he's not going to win, so down the road, do we really want to have the show center around him?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe they snuck in some lines, more recently, but I don't know. But Robert, was there something else you were going to say?
Yeah, just about the issue you guys brought up about the social commentary as well. Yeah, I felt that there were a few punches pulled. One episode in particular, and maybe I'm again jumping ahead, but there was the third episode where you got some commentary on like religion. And I felt like, I was like, oh, we're going to do this? Okay. But I felt like some of the jokes were really just talking about how, in the past, religion was this really barbaric thing. And I thought that they were going to go even, maybe talk about it in a more contemporary way, talking about, there's plenty to criticize. But I felt like they pulled up short on that one. Also, I wanted a little more, and maybe this is a little unfair, I don't know, but I wanted a little more about Bean learning about just the concept of privilege. I mean, there are times when she doesn't seem fully aware of how good she has it. Maybe that's a part of being a teenager and all that.
Well, but that's that's intentional humor. Like when she's interacting with Bunty, her chambermaid or whatever, and she says stuff like, what is it? Like there's some line about, you know what it's like this bed is so soft. You know what that's like to sleep in a bed like this. And Bunty's just gaze. Oh, no. She like lies down in the bed and it's like the most amazing thing that's ever happened to her. Right.
Yes. Well, there was
go ahead.
There was an episode where she gets kicked out of the castle and has to learn some things, but the episode ends with her getting put back in and everything's back together again. So I felt like they were leaning toward changing the character in some way, but then they decided, wait, let's reset everything and start over. So
yeah, that's the one where she ends up in Bunty's house with the 9 kids and the one where she has to go get a job, and she does have this realization like, oh, this is not good. But then nothing really is done with it.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny, like you said, Dave, I'm thinking more and more about how you said fantasy is this great way to comment, to do social commentary, and they just seem to completely avoid it. Like maybe it makes sense that they're not going to talk about Trump in the show, but could they not have talked about like police brutality or any of the issues we're facing, like the 1%? They couldn't. It seems like there's so many opportunities to get into that stuff, and they just never really did.
Well, here's my take on that, which is it felt to me like this was about the overarching story of what happens to these three people, and it wasn't so much about making jokes the way that the Simpsons and Futurama did. And they also spent quite a bit of time making references to fantasy movies like, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. So they felt like they were trying to make fun of those things and at the expense of making sharp, smart jokes.
See, I was shocked at the lack of references to fantasy things. I mean, there was the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones in the first episode.
Right.
And then there was Hansel and Gretel from the Grimm Brothers fairy tales. What are some other, like...
Oh, okay.
What are some like fantasy that only like fantasy fans would know? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the king, and this is towards the end, you find out is essentially Robert Baratheon from Game of Thrones. The turkeys that they use to send messages.
The turkeys, that's funny. But wait, how is he Robert Baratheon?
Because he was, when he was married to Dagmar, or whatever the first wife's name was, he was like in shape, and he was known as the big warrior, and then she died, and he became like this fat, angry guy. You don't remember that from the...
No, I do. That doesn't strike me as like... I mean, that's like every king is like that. I mean...
But that's very specifically Robert Baratheon, where he was known as this great warrior, and then by the end, after... what's the name? The Ned's sister dies. He kind of loses interest and just becomes this fat drunk guy.
Her name is Lyanna Stark, Andrea.
Yes,
but I'm saying...
I've committed a great sin there. Sorry.
But I'm saying, like, because I actually wanted more things where I felt like, I mean, even Game of Thrones is so mainstream these days because the HBO show. I mean, I want references to, like, like old Dungeons and Dragons modules from the 80s. And, like, you know what I mean? Like, there was nothing like that in here at all. Yeah,
you mean, like, parody specifically. Because that thing with Zog that Andrew's talking about, that wasn't exactly parody. That was that was just the character being built in the show. I thought there would be more parody. I was wondering, like, are they going to go after fans of this genre? Is there going to be some like moment where the characters break the fourth wall? Similar to that episode of Saturday Night Live where William Shatner tells the Star Trek fans to get a life. I thought that there would be a moment like that in this show that really took some of the fans to task, and it didn't do that. Not that it has to, but I was just curious. I thought it would.
I want stuff that I can go on my podcast and show off how much I know about all these obscure things. And they're just like, they're not giving me anything here.
But that's not what your general audience is going to know. They're not going to know those obscure things. They're going to know Game of Thrones. They're going to know Lord of the Rings. There were a couple of Lord of the Rings references in there where they made fun of Lord of the Rings.
Or they could have gone off on like World of Warcraft, even though I've never played World of Warcraft, and there's probably it's not a really mainstream thing, but everybody knows what it is. Like that great episode of of South Park. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but I feel like if there's a lot of in-jokes, even if you don't get the in-jokes, you know that there's something there. It gives this sort of texture and just sort of feeling of kind of, I don't know, coolness or something to it. And because there's all these signs in the background, but if you, which by the way go by way too fast, and you have to, at least I had to pause it to go back and read them, which I found somewhat distracting. But they're all like, and some of them are, the one that sticks out in my mind is the funniest is the Pillage People. The band is the Pillage People.
I wrote that down in my notes. I was like, yeah, Pillage People.
But some of those things, it should be like some some obscure reference, and you would be like, I don't know what that is, but now I want to find out. That it's just like, because I feel like things that you don't quite understand. I just like the feeling of that. I mean, like, I grew up reading Robert Asprin's Myth series. Part of the reason I'm such a big fan of humorous fantasy is because that was my favorite series growing up. And there were all sorts of references in that to The Godfather and like just everything. And I had no idea what any of them were. But I just liked that. It gives you this feeling of there's like a mystery to solve. There's some layer that you can sense beneath the water, but you can't quite make out. Whereas this show just seems very all on the surface.
If you want an obscure reference, did anybody catch the Mrs. Kravitz reference?
No.
I did. I forget the exact. I caught the line. Yeah.
I don't remember the exact thing either, but it was like somebody was peeking out the window, like Mrs. Kravitz or so-and-so Kravitz was peeking out the castle window and noticed something happening and reported it. I was like, oh my gosh, whose head did that? It didn't go over my head, but everybody else.
Oh, I missed that. God, I wish I'd heard that. I love a good Mrs. Kravitz, Gladys Kravitz reference.
That's right.
I think you might have to explain that one to me, Tom.
That's from Bewitched. The next door neighbor in Bewitched was always looking out the window and saying, Abner, look what they're doing now. And he was reading his paper. Samantha's out there turning somebody's head into a horse's head, and then she sees it and she freaks out, and he's just reading his paper. He's real jaded. He doesn't look up. He says, sit down, you're nosy.
But yeah, so I mean, because I feel like a lot of this is intentional, like that. Even from interviews I read that they didn't want it to be just like a parody of fantasy tropes, and they wanted the characters in the world to have its own reality, which is fine as far as it goes. But I feel like if you're going to do that, you need better characters. You need a stronger world, because the world just feels very generic. It just feels like there's a king and there's like a peasants and like whatever. It doesn't feel like the lack of references, is fine if there's something else there for you to kind of grapple with, but there just isn't really.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there should be at least some way to engage the viewer. Like maybe you don't want it to be all a bunch of parodies about all these other works in the same genre. You don't want to do that. You want to have your own original thing. But you have to know the person sitting there watching this has seen all that stuff, and they're not engaged unless you're gonna kind of speak to them in some way. The viewer is very savvy and has seen at least the mainstream fantasy stuff. So engage them, pull them in, especially if it's a comedy and anything can happen. Go ahead and use those things now and again to kind of pin them, pull them back in and be like, hey, this is for you. We know you're sitting there watching this. We're going to, throw you some cookies every once in a while.
Right. And the viewers have seen Shrek before, right? We've seen like so much of this stuff is just sort of Shrek-like to me, the sort of fairy tale kingdom with like sort of anachronistic elements in it. Yeah, it just needs more, in my opinion.
I just wanted to get funnier,
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's another thing is that these episodes, since it's on Netflix, the episodes can be as long or as short as they want. And I don't understand why a lot of the jokes that just, to my mind, very obviously fall flat weren't edited out. Like you have a 27-minute long episode. Why not edit out 5 minutes of kind of, so-so jokes and make it 22 minutes,
Right. Well, that's 20 minutes is what a regular half-hour show is.
21, 21, yeah.
21, yeah. So they're actually writing more than a network show would have.
Yeah, especially when you take into consideration some of the jokes I would classify as Family Guy jokes, where the joke is just the fact that they're dragging it out. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything. But the fact that they're dragging it out and you're waiting for it to end is the joke. They did that a few times, and I was like, oh, guys, come on. Don't do this.
But so
it didn't. That didn't really seem to work when they did that. When they would drag it out, like I got what they were going for, but for some reason it wasn't. I don't know. Like when Peter falls down on the sidewalk and skins his knee, and he goes, ah, and it keeps going. I don't know. I was laughing uncontrollably watching that, but this I was watching. And I was like, yeah, that's what they're going for, but it's not. For some reason, it's not getting me.
But so I think Andrea and Robert, if I'm remembering right, you said that you wanted it. Or you wanted it to be more episodic or more?
No, I didn't say it. I just, that's what I went in expecting, and it wasn't that. I just wanted to be funnier. I want the jokes to be, I want to laugh. It's a comedy show. Make me laugh. And I wasn't laughing nearly as much as I thought I should, considering that it's,
well, because I thought it should have been much more serialized. I was expecting it to be, because I feel like that's the moment we're in now with these streaming shows where everyone's going to watch every episode in order and binge it. Mm-hmm. Why not have a great story that continues from episode to episode? And I think like people were saying that, the plot doesn't really kick in until the last 2 episodes, and there are little things seeded in throughout, but you could basically skip, I think, about 5 of the episodes, maybe more, and not miss anything important.
Well, 5th episode is when I started warming up to it.
Which episode is that?
I feel like episode 5, which is
Start to the convent.
Yeah, the where she becomes the executioner.
Yeah,
Okay.
Where she has to go get a job. That sort of made me. It had a better jokes, and I started warming up. I think I started getting more invested in the characters. But it didn't. I didn't start really actually enjoying myself till maybe 7 or 8.
Let me just say about the convent, because I thought that was a really promising direction.
Right.
I thought it was going to be an episode about Bean goes to the convent, and it just seemed like that was just a scenario that was just rich with dramatic and humorous possibilities. And then 2 or 3 minutes later, she's left it. I found that sort of baffling.
Yeah, that was one of the pulled punches I was talking about when I meant, I was like, oh, well, here's an opportunity to really explore this particular issue. But yeah, that episode got jerked around many different places, because first it was convent, then it was the executioner business, then it ends with
Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah. And let me also say, this was part of a string of episodes where, and this speaks to both the plotting and the character development. String of episodes where Bean is trying to figure out what she's good at. These episodes end with what I felt was a very hastily slapped together action scene, where Bean basically saves the day. And I'm like, well, she's a warrior. How have we not figured this out yet? The episode after this ends with Bean taking out a 3-story swamp monster with just a sash. I don't know if you remember that part. Like, if you blink, you missed it. It was like, it felt like they needed to wrap up the episode quickly, so they had Bean act like a superhero for like 2 seconds, and then they're still back to this business of wondering what Bean is good at. It was a very frustrating string of episodes in the middle for me.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and it just makes her more like Leela. It's like it's sort of the gravitational pull of just becoming another Leela. You said episode 7. What was episode 7, Andrea, that you said you started warming up a little bit more?
5, I started not hating it. 7, I thought was funny. It had some really good jokes. That was when the giant, the girlfriend giant person.
That was pretty funny.
Yeah, they had some really good jokes where there was one where the waitresses are talking about how Lucy's sexy. He goes, one of them says he's ugly sexy, and the other one says, yeah, like your dad. So there's some sharpness there.
And then there's the horse who can laugh like a person, and then he gets hooked up with the hermit, and the hermit's like, "Oh, you have such a great laugh," and then like 5 minutes later, he's like, "I'm profoundly lonely, but I think you should leave."
You leave, yeah.
Well, the whole thing with Elfo pretending to have a girlfriend, I know that's kind of like been done before, but I thought that was legitimately funny. And then that episode had the like hallucinogenic trip.
Yes.
And then they meet the giant, and then there's some sort of like funny kind of like.
Well, she puts the crystal ball eye in for her eye, and she sees the truth about everybody.
That was cool.
But there's some sort of would it be right to call it feminist? There's some like stuff with the giant where she's I forget, isn't she like a grad student or something?
Yeah, she goes, I'm a grad student. Yeah.
No,
why do you hate people who are different? That was the whole, pretty much the episode. It was what was not to hate, people who are different, not to demonize others. That was sort of the underlying message, but they don't lean very hard on message. They sort of they sort of hint at it, but never really go there.
Yeah, but so I thought that episode was, was all right. I mean, I laughed a lot in that episode. And then, so then let's get into the last couple episodes, because then there actually is a really interesting story and some really clever twists.
I agree.
In the last few episodes. So let's see. I don't even know if I could even reconstruct now everything that happens. But so let's see. We find there's the statue of Bean's mom that we find out is actually the queen, is actually her mom who's been turned to stone, and that the reason King Zog has wanted this elixir of life so bad is not for himself, but because he wants to bring his wife, his previous wife, back to life. I don't know. Does anyone remember? Can anyone want to pick up what happens in these two episodes?
Doesn't he tell her? Basically, reveals to Bean that she's the reason her mother died because she switched the wines. Everybody thought he thinks it's trying. Everybody was trying to poison him, but so when she was a baby, she turned the wines around and.
Yeah, so there were two glasses of wine on a rotating
Mm-hmm.
table thing, and she was reaching for some grapes or something.
Yes, yeah.
So the queen ended up drinking the glass that had been intended for the king. And yeah,
I thought it was a fantastic character development that this king, who, by the way, I thought the actor, he was my favorite part of the whole thing, was the actor who played the king. Just his accent and the way he handled everything, I thought was fun to watch.
Yeah, he's Bender. I don't know if you guys know that.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, he was fantastic, but it was a cool twist where the whole show you think he's just this complete jerk despot, and he's looking for this elixir of life because he wants to be immortal and he's selfish, and then I love how in the last couple of episodes it actually turns out that he's sort of selfish, but he doesn't want the elixir of life for himself. He wants it to bring his dead wife back. And that's the whole reason he's been looking for it for the whole series. And I was like, to me, that was like one of those moments when somebody you've been looking at for a long time suddenly gets hit by a different light. Mm-hmm. And you think, oh wow, this person is completely different than what I thought. That was a really fun moment for me. I really thought that was great.
Although, isn't there a line in the first episode or something where he says, "Don't you want a magic daddy? Like, don't you want, I need the elixir of life because wouldn't it be cool to have a magic daddy?" And she's like, "I'm going to pretend you didn't say that," or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, he did say that, yeah.
So I wonder if they got to episode 9 and they're like, "Oh, wait, we should rewrite this," but it was too late to change. I don't know. That's weird. I mean, I guess...
I kind of feel like they had episode 9 and 10 already written. And that's why I say, like, I wonder if Matt Groening went to Netflix and was like, "I got this great idea for an hour and a half long cartoon movie," and they're like, "Yeah, sounds cool. Could you stretch it to be a series?" And then they wrote kind of episodes 1 through 7 after that. Like, yeah, sure, we'll stretch it out. And if you look at who wrote and directed, like, it's a different person wrote and directed each show, which I think is kind of common with serials. But yeah. I don't know, for some reason, like with shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I became a huge fan of late in life, it just seems to work better when because Joss Whedon would write like every 7th or every 5th episode or something, so it would keep you hooked in. And then the ones he didn't write would still have like good enough story and fun stuff that it wasn't too spotty.
I mean, the best thing is when it's like J. Michael Straczynski and he writes like 129 episodes of Babylon 5 himself.
I don't know how the heck he...
Yeah.
Is that true? He really did that?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like there's 140 episodes and he wrote 121 of them or something like that.
That's insane.
That's incredible.
Like a boss. Yeah, I will say episode 9 has that moment where, and we're getting into spoilers now, but you've already given a spoiler warning, so...
Yeah.
But, that has that moment where Elfo dies, and this is after they've spent a lot of time trying to extract his blood and use it for this elixir. They finally complete this quest where they get the elixir, and Bean has to make a decision about who to give the elixir to, Elfo or her mother, and she decides to go for the mother. And I thought that there was a case where that showed the potential of this show, that they were willing to have the main character make a very difficult decision, a decision that we know is going to be fraught with all sorts of consequences. We know we're not buying it that Elfo's dead, obviously.
No.
So which is fine. That's sort of, it's just like Jon Snow.
Yeah, I was just thinking that earlier.
Yeah, there's your Game of Thrones
Jon
reference.
Schnoz. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, I liked that, and that had a lot of potential. But again, makes me look back at how there were so many episodes before this where I'm like, why is it taking so long to get here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like all of a sudden everything happened in the last 3 episodes. 8, 9, and 10, just like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, and
and suddenly everybody had depth.
Yeah, and there's so little affection between these three characters, which made some of these scenes like I like the idea of Bean having to decide to leave Elfo for dead, but there's so little affection between them up until now. There are many moments where she just dismisses him. There's that awful part in the Viking episode where Elfo tries to get in the way of her sleeping with one of the Vikings out of bitterness, which is just really painful and difficult to watch. I mean, they were trying to establish that he was turning into a bit of a jerk, but goddamn, that was tough to watch.
I thought that was funny when he was going, I'm just trying to control you. Like he's becoming her father. He's like, oh, but I don't want to do and he just does it over and over again. Oh, that had me laughing.
That part I like, but up until that, yeah, I don't know. I'm already a little on the fence about him being like his arc being about his unrequited thing for Bean. I thought it would be nice to give him more of a quest to be on, especially since he's sitting around waiting for his blood to be extracted, and doesn't seem to object to it. So this is another case of Elfo's character not fully making sense to me. Like, yes, I understand you want to get a taste of misery, but you're sitting around waiting for them to vivisect you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there was a funny line where the king says, if this doesn't work, I'm going to grind him up into pastes and try that. And Elfo says, boy, if the paste doesn't work, I'm going to be in big trouble. but there's this weird, there's this weird disconnect between how okay he is with, being killed for his blood versus, being rejected by Bean. I agree with that. It's his character's not terribly consistent, at least as far as I can see.
No, it's not.
Well, so then we can say, and I thought as episodes 8 and 9 develop, where Bean's mom turns out to be, I don't know if I can say if she turns out to, I was going to say she turns out to be a bad guy, but actually I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but she turns out to be scheming against Dreamland anyway.
Yeah.
And so it turns out that she was the one who tried to poison King Zog, and then because Bean turned the little spinner table thing around, the queen ended up poisoning herself and turning herself into stone. But so now that she's been revived, now she can execute her scheme, which involves turning everyone into Dreamland to stone, and then sort of spiriting Bean away.
On a ship with a bunch of weird creatures.
On a ship with a bunch of weird monsters, yeah. So we definitely don't know what's going on. As season 1 wraps up. But I thought, all those twists were great. I thought that they were, even in a non-cartoon, non-comedy show, that would be terrific,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I read a Variety article today about the show, and they had an interview with Matt Groening in it, and he was saying that they plotted the show as a drama originally, and then they added jokes after. And I thought, maybe they didn't spend as much time on the drama of episodes 1 through 7, and maybe they put all the time on the drama into, the last 3 episodes, because to me, those were by far the best. They were the most entertaining. They were the funniest, too. And I was thinking, maybe it's easier for that team of writers. I guess I read, too, that they had a writer's room of 12. And maybe it was easier for that team of 12 writers, or for any writers, to be funnier when there's real stress and real heartbreak and real things going on. It's easier to be funny about that than it is to be just randomly funny about in a vacuum. So maybe that was it. Maybe, they built this as a drama, but all the effort of the drama, all the real stuff that really gets you in a difficult way, not a funny way, but all the, like you said, the betrayals and the reversals and the shockers and all this stuff going on was in the last 3 episodes, and that's where the most humor is, because there's just more general like energy there.
Well, I feel like it's a standard length for a season for 10 episodes, and they got 20 episodes right off the bat. And so I think maybe it was just tempting to end season 1 with these big reveals and twists and everything. But then they were sort of committed to producing 7 or 8 episodes leading up to that, and just didn't have enough story to do that. And so just kind of had to, slot in a bunch of random, they're like, oh, let's go visit Una's kingdom. Let's, whatever. Like, so yeah, I mean, I wonder if they if they had only gotten 10 episodes, if they had only gotten a 10 episode series order, if, these twists and things with the mom would have been like episode 4 or something. Mm-hmm. And then, the series would maybe, be a lot tighter and have a lot more to recommend it episode to episode.
Yeah. Can I tell you the episode that I think disappointed me the most? I know we're going back to the episode, the sort of, I don't want to say wasted episodes, but episodes that could have been more tied to this plot that really starts to come together in the last few. So episode 3 is the one where Bean gets exorcised and Lucy gets taken out of her, but then she decides to go rescue Lucy because Lucy's about to get thrown into some pit of Mordor and will be destroyed. I was really bummed about that one because that I thought was an opportunity to actually show a bond between the two characters that felt genuine. And I understand, like, logically it makes sense that, Lucy saves Bean's life, so therefore Bean wants to repay the favor. But Lucy only saves Bean's life to save his own life, not out of some like deep bond they might have been forming. And when she goes to rescue him, she just adopts him back into her life again without any new, negotiation, without being like, hey, you can't have me destroying the kingdom anymore. We have to work together now. You can't just be you wrecking my life. So I was really bummed about that. I really wanted that to be an episode that had some of this heart that we've been talking about, and really could have shown some depth to the Lucy character, even though I guess Lucy's always going to be one note here, which makes sense since he's a demon. But I don't know. I thought that episode missed a beat and could have had another element of just showing how they cared about each other. I also liked the idea of the demons being a necessary part of society, that they're just a rebellious part of society that questions authority. They could have explored that a little more, but the episode just ends with the demons being loosed in the city, and it never gets referenced again.
Yeah, I was going to say that goes nowhere. And that would be really fun to see that, but gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Robert, how would you when they hear this Geek Guide to the Galaxy episode and they decide that what we really need is Robert on the writing team? Well, how would you have changed that ending?
I think there could have been more about. There would have been a couple things. Like, I think we could have had Lucy actually compel Bean or convince Bean to do something rebellious that's actually for something good. I mean, maybe Lucy doesn't regard it as good, but maybe just standing up to her father, or like, something like that, where Bean just realizes, like, yes, it's good to have a little demon on your shoulder once in a while. Otherwise, you just be a robot just following orders all the time. So I thought that it would need that element, and also at the very end, when she breaks Lucy out of the little prison that the exorcist has put him in. I don't know. She could have negotiated with him. She could have said something like, "Look, we just can't be tearing things apart anymore. We have to. Our relationship has to change as a result of this." None of that happens. It's just she rescues him. Everything's back to square one. The demons get loosed, and it never gets referenced again. Nobody seems to have learned much. So that's my complaint.
I feel like part of the issue is that, how close can their relationships be after 2 episodes or whatever? They just met in episode 1. But I agree with you that if Bean is going to risk her life to rescue Lucy or whatever, then we need to have some reason to care about their relationship. But I wonder if that's more of an argument for not having Bean risking her life to rescue Lucy in episode 4 or whatever, that the characters' adventures, such as they are, should be more low key until enough time has passed that they have established these relationships, and then if one of the characters gets kidnapped or their life's in danger, it means something to us. Mm-hmm. And that maybe they just rushed into these sort of action adventure stories. I mean, like in the very first episode, Bean grabs Elfo and Lucy by the hands and like drags them off the cliff with her as she's plummeting, presumably to her death. Like maybe they don't want to jump off the cliff. Like, you know what I mean? It's there's like this, yeah, it's just this like weirdly like over dramatic things, you know, given how much character development there's been.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, essentially everything felt like filler. We got to do something here, so let's do this. But there was nothing that, you know, there's no backstory to it. There's no character development, no relationship development, so none of it hits anywhere. You know?
It might be kind of the way this was built too. Like in the Variety article I just mentioned, the Matt Groening said the whole idea for the show came out because he was, you know, he's an artist, and he was drawing. He had the sketchbook and he was filling it up with all these mythical creatures, and over several years, and he thought, you know, it would be great to do a show with all these characters. And he thought they don't really fit into The Simpsons anywhere, and they don't really fit into, I guess Futurama was over by then, but he said, you know, I guess what I want to do is a fantasy show with this. So maybe, I don't know, maybe because he had all these sketches, he wanted to use them all, he wanted to get them in there, and that was his driving force. And so it was less like based off of, I want to tell this great story, and more based off of, here are these really cool visuals I want to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to believe that the sort of people who would work on a show like this aren't huge fantasy fans, but it doesn't feel like this is a show that was made by huge fantasy fans. You know, I don't get the feeling that these are people who are intimately familiar with Robert Asprin and Craig Shaw Gardner and Terry Pratchett and, you know, like all these sort of humorous fantasy authors. And, you know, maybe these are people who are more into, you know, because like Futurama, you felt like there's at least some people, maybe all people on this show know a lot about science fiction, but I don't get the same sense about fantasy with this. And if that's the case, maybe they need to bring on a few more hardcore fantasy fans.
Is that your pitch for getting on the writing team?
Hey, I'm the host of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, Andrea. There's no place I'd rather be.
It would be a step down.
Anything would be a step down from this, from these Olympian heights that I currently occupy. But I mean, there are other fantasy fans out there who I'm sure could use the work, and I mean, like I said, and it may just be that this was a conscious choice not to like indulge in the like fantasy geekiness, hardcore kind of stuff. But if so, that's a mistake, in my opinion, although I'm not like the best judge for a general audience, obviously. But that's just what I would want to see. See, Tom, like you're a fan of, like I mentioned, Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett and Robert Sheckley and people like that, right? Do you agree with me that this needs more of that kind of stuff in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think I hadn't thought about this until you mentioned it, but I was trying to picture if anybody on the show was a huge Pratchett fan, and I had to think, no, they can't be. I mean, maybe, but I really, after watching the show, I really doubt it, because there's so, like, Pratchett explored, like, every nook and cranny of the fantasy world for humor, of, like, the whole fantasy genre for humor. And to stand on those shoulders, like, you have to think, well, the bar's way up here. And it seems like they didn't even see that bar. Like, they were just like, well, we're gonna make some jokes, we're gonna be over here, and then one day they're gonna like start reading Pratchett, and they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, whoa, what did we do? So yeah, it could definitely use a lot more of that. I feel like it could use, like we've all been saying, it could use a lot more heart, and just like the last two episodes I thought had a lot of heart, and it was a surprise after the first seven and a half. I feel like halfway through episode 8 actually was where I started liking it. So, yeah, I think tons more of that kind of humor, but first and foremost, like tons more of like just gut-wrenching stuff going on, and then let the humor kind of come out of that. That's what I'd like to see.
There's a specific thing I'd like to see if I were to watch any more of this. I actually was hoping that we'd learn a little more about Una, because she's practically an alien stuck here. And I'm assuming, now we didn't see her get caught up in the magic spell that appears to wipe out Dreamland. So I'm assuming she's still alive. And I'm kind of hoping that maybe she and Zog will have some kind of quest to go on together in which they actually learn to appreciate and respect each other while driving each other crazy, I'm sure. But where they maybe learn that they have a little more in common than they thought. Because at the moment, it's just straight up marriage of convenience, and you almost feel bad for them, even though they have it better than almost everybody else in the kingdom. So I'm curious about that.
Isn't there a scene, though, where she's plotting with Oddval somehow?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Is.
Well, but maybe...
But then...
Yeah, who knows?
Or Oddval gets turned to stone, too.
Yeah.
But she's more than she appears to be, too. There's different factions, and she's part of one of them, it seems like. I mean, I guess she could still, like, have develop a real relationship with Zog, I guess, but that gave me the feeling it's going more of a sort of... intrigue, conspiracy.
Plots within plots.
Yeah, wheels within wheels. Game of Thrones style stuff with like with Lyanna Stark, which everyone knows.
Right.
Oh my God, you're not gonna let this go.
But yeah, so if you're listening to this and you haven't watched the show at all and you want to give it a try, I would recommend. I'm trying to think. Maybe watch the first episode, and then maybe skip to 7. Watch 7, 8, 9, 10.
I think you can get away with that.
You're not missing anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I counted like 4 episodes that ended with like a very slow-moving, sloppy, contrived action scene. Episode 7, I don't think ends that way. So that might be a good one for people who are testing it out.
I kind of enjoyed the Hansel and Gretel retelling. I thought that was kind of fun. How they were, they brought the witch out, and they're like, "Oh, this is that witch that killed all those kids, including Hansel and Gretel." And then come to find out, Hansel and Gretel are actually the serial killers, and they've placed a curse on the witch so she can't talk. All she can do is cackle, and they're in there just like in this candy house, gingerbread house, just like all these recipes around them for how to cook people, and I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, so I did like the Hansel and Gretel, and that was when they go down into Hansel and Gretel's like torture dungeon or whatever. Was genuine. That was the first time I felt any tension watching the show. So that was episode 5. So yeah, I guess you could watch episode 5 too if you want.
Yeah, that's where I started to warm up. That's where I wasn't hating it anymore. and then by 7 I was laughing.
It's just so strange that, I mean, it's not like the team behind this show has never made a cartoon before. I mean, there's like 30 years of experience making The Simpsons and, 7 seasons of Futurama. It's just sort of odd to me that there's all these things that just seem to be very fundamental storytelling things that just aren't connecting in this show.
Yeah. My first thought actually was that, boy, this is a room of really young writers. I thought it was like a room of green writers. And I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today who's a comedy writer. And he's like, no, it's all old. It's Futurama people. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I was like, how did it end up so bad for the beginning? Like, if you can't hook me in the first episode, like that's bad. It takes till 5 till you got me? Ugh. That's a problem.
I mean, what I read is that sort of half Simpsons and Futurama alums and then half new writers. So I don't know how much the new writers...
Well, new writers generally don't, it's the old writers. It's the seasoned writers who are usually lead the room. So I was shocked. Genuinely shocked.
Yeah, Yeah, and if I were to run through the episodes, I would say, yeah, episode 1 we mentioned how it's just putting things into place. Episode 2 is just a continuation of that, which I felt was not very memorable. Episode 3 I just mentioned how it has a cool premise. I didn't really like the character development. Episode 4 is where the Vikings show up. This was the one where I really started to wonder about Bean's character. I actually wrote in my notes, she's a teenager, ?
Yeah.
It's so stupid because she's drinking at a bar, so I'm like, well, she's got to be over 21, right? Which is so stupid. That was a weird one because that's where it establishes that she's got like this drinking problem. But it's weird because sometimes she's drinking as like a party animal, which makes sense. Sometimes she seems to have like this bitter, cynical drinking problem that like a person 3 times her age would have. So I was puzzled about that. I also thought that how she's a party animal who sleeps around, but then she can't get anyone to dance with her, and that's a running joke for like what felt like 6 minutes. That one was brutal.
Yeah.
Episode 5 you just mentioned with Hansel and Gretel. I was okay with that one. Episode 6 though, that was one where again ends with a long drawn out action scene that doesn't really have much tension, and there's a huge chunk in the middle where all the jokes are derived from her being incredibly drunk, which I think might be tough for some people to watch, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And then
6
from there,
was a low point.
Yeah,
really.
yeah. And then from there, and it just drags on and on. And then from there, we have from episode 7 to 10, which I think we agreed was where, there was some quality stuff in there, and yeah, we're wondering why it didn't move. So there's my quick summary.
And I mean, the thing is, there's so many good cartoons on right now. I mean, I think Robert mentioned Rick and Morty, or maybe it was Tom, I forget. And I mean, my girlfriend Stephanie and I have been watching Gravity Falls, which is terrific. I mean, I think it's just at a completely different level than this. And I think there's actually some people from Gravity Falls on the writing team for this, which so again, it sort of puzzles me why this is so uneven. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe someday we'll find out why this isn't connecting with us the way.
Well, I think you also have to take into account that The Simpsons and Futurama are both they weren't hits right out of the gate. It wasn't until like the middle that they started really getting into their stride and became the classics, or at least The Simpsons. The classics shows that I remember were from the middle part of it. So I think it's gonna find its voice. The beginning was harsh. The beginning was hard, but it picks up. It made me want to see the next season. Absolutely. And I think it's gonna find its voice. I do. I actually do think that.
I fully agree. I thought, I feel kind of bad that we spent so much of this show just kind of harping on what's wrong with the show, but my takeaway from it was that it's still kind of finding itself, and I thought, just like you said, you hit it on the head, Andrew, when you said it made you want to watch the next season. It made me want to too. Like, not if I hadn't had to watch all of it, I wouldn't have. But in order to be part of this discussion, I watched all of it, and then once I got to the last 3 episodes, I was glad I did. Yeah. And I really do want to see what happens next. Now I'm like, okay, now that I saw episodes 8, 9, and 10, I want to see the next season for sure.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, Andrea, and I meant to mention that because I read other people. I haven't obviously watched the first season of Simpsons or Futurama in many, many years, but people have said if you go back and watch them now, they're they don't hold up all that well. No. So yeah, I mean, this may take. I mean, and there's going to be another 10 episodes that I think they're already. They're pretty much done.
They already made them, yeah.
So, I mean, we'll get to see how it develops. I mean, it's certainly, as we're saying, though, episodes 9 and 10 certainly give you, a lot of reason to, a lot of reasons for optimism. I think I'm unlikely to watch any more episodes unless I hear, like, good word of mouth that, oh yeah, the season 2 is good. You should check it out.
Really, you don't want to find out what it was all about? The mother and the ship and Una and how Elfo's going to come back to life and.
Oh, well, actually, speaking of that, did you guys watch the post-credit scene?
Yes.
I didn't see it. I don't know how I missed it. I might have walked out of the room when it was on credits.
So yeah, in the middle of the credits in episode 10, you see Elfo get pulled out of the ocean
out of the water.
By mermaids. So yeah, Elfo is certainly not dead. If anyone was worried, he's definitely coming.
Or at least rigor mortis hasn't set in. Now, the first episode might be a Weekend at Bernie's kind of thing going on.
Well, that would be sweet.
Yeah. I was going to say, as far as watching more stuff, maybe, yes, other people need to be the guinea pig for me before I venture there. But I'm curious. I actually, you're right. It is when we're talking about these things, it is easy to start harping on things. But yeah, I agree that it actually is a major accomplishment of these first 10 episodes that I am curious, and I think that seems to be the consensus of some of the reviews I've read, and it seems to be what we're converging on here is that, because those last few episodes tries to push things and, tries to lead us on this new adventure with these characters that we're willing to learn a little bit more about. We're ready to learn more. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an accomplishment.
And I'll say, I went back and rewatched the first episode, and the first time I watched it, I was pretty underwhelmed by it. And the second time, I found it fairly enjoyable. So it may just be that, I had high expectations. I have all these memories of Futurama and all these memories of, Bart's class going to the nuclear power plant. And I was sort of expecting something like that. And and what we have instead is sort of a, kind of a likable, fantasy cartoon. It's not, in my opinion, it's no Rick and Morty and it's no Gravity Falls, but it's not terrible. And it certainly could develop into something special. If they take all my suggestions.
No, I'm
right.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they're listening. They're going to be listening to this.
Yeah, and taking notes. I hope you've all been taking notes. All right, cool. So we're pretty much out of time. So does anyone have any final thoughts they want to throw in here?
I think I said I think I said my piece.
I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
All right, cool. So I guess we'll wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Robert Repino, Andrea Kail, and Tom Gerencer. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Robert Repino, Andrea Kail, and Tom Gerencer for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Gadgetude, who writes, "The amount of work that goes into the podcast shows in every aspect of it. It's one of the most professionally done podcasts on the internet on any subject. The interviews are thoughtful, and it's clear the host spends a lot of time preparing for them so he can speak intelligently to the author or other interviewee. The panels are always interesting, even though my opinion often differs from the common theme of the panel, with intelligent, relevant discussion. Every episode is exceptionally well edited to remove things like pauses in the conversation or someone saying while they try to think of what to say. All of the shows are on target, interesting, and extremely well done. So, big thanks again to Gadgetude for that great review. Special thanks as well to Alicia Brenner and Tiffany Peng, who both just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.